of Jerusalem, so that we may no longer suffer disgrace. I told them that the hand of my God had been gracious upon me, and also the words that the king had spoken to me. Then they said, let us start building. So they committed themselves to the common good. Let us reflect. You have committed yourselves to the common good. You have offered yourselves to be the servants of the people. What trouble are we in? In what areas can we say that the Bahamas lies in ruins? What walls need rebuilding? Where do we begin? First of all, family life needs rebuilding. Social services is a ministry that has an onerous task of restoring what has been lost and providing what is needed. What more can we do to rebuild the crumbling walls of family life? We can focus on relationships. We can focus on conflict resolution. We can focus on communication. We can focus on parenting. Number 2, education and educational opportunities always need expanding. We can all do more to support teachers with continued training and encouragement. We can challenge parents to be more attentive to academic needs, supervising homework, attending teacher-parent conferences and PTA meetings, providing nutritional meals and a quiet environment for study and sleep. Number 3, health is a valuable resource. We cannot study if we do not feel well. We cannot work if we do not feel well. We cannot build a strong nation if we do not feel well. Fourthly, youth is a ministry that has a strong impact on shaping the lives of young national leaders. All of our children are capable of leading in some capacity. These are just some of the ministries that need constant rebuilding. There is much work to be done in every ministry and area of society, and we will consider others as time goes on. Let us be encouraged that our labor is not in vain. Things done for the Lord will last. Let us all do what we can to bring healing and wholeness to our people. Let us keep the bigger picture of national development before us, building on all that has gone before and dreaming God's bigger dreams for the future. And so I invite you to pray with me. Good and gracious God, we bring our broken hearts, our wounded spirits, our lost dreams, our frustrated efforts, our failed attempts. We thank you, Lord, for being the master builder who will help us to rebuild our walls in the family, in education, in health, and in youth development. May all be totally committed to the common good. Let us never grow weary in well-doing. May we confess our sins, Lord, our shortcomings, repent, and be transformed by the Holy Spirit to accomplish great things in your name. Lord, please heal us, help us, bless us, and use us to your glory. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Michael Pintar, Darren Hanfield, Ramal Ferrera, Benito Rose, Renzo Rose, Ellsworth Johnson, Philip Davis, Warren Miller, Lisa Parker Esther, Aaron Lewis, Carlton Bowman, James Audrey, Travis Robinson, Adrian Gibson, Donald Saunders, Frederick Nakalkine, Hank Johnson, Mark Hume, Michael Cook, Miriam Wesley Emmanuel, Reese Shipman, Ruben Ramos, Ricky Matthews, Shannon R. Cartwright, Sonal Ferguson, Glennis Anna Martin, Michael Falls, Jessica Pickey.
Good morning, honorable members, members of the gallery. Honorable members, today we are graced with the presence of a number of persons from the public service who are observing Public Service Week. With us is the Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ms. Sharon Pratt-Roll, the co-chairperson, and the CTO, Ms. Nicole Watson. And other members of the group include Ms. Raj Brennan, Ms. Arlene Poitier, Ms. Deborah Bethel, Mr. Lavelle Watson, Ms. Judy Hamilton, Ms. Claudette Wims, and Ms. Anya Nixon. Can you all stand for us, please? If I miss any names from your contingent, can the others please stand? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm also advised that later on this evening at 3 p.m. another group from the Youth Parliament will be visiting with us, and I would make that announcement at that time. Introduction and swearing in of new members. Laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Kalani.
I beg leave to lay a copy of the following document. Audited financial statements, Antiquities, Monuments and Museums Corporation, National Museum of Farmers, June 30th, 2013.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lay on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. Statements and communications by ministers. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for South Beach.
Okay, please. You Honorable Speaker. Good morning.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to present to this Honorable House communication on a matter which has been a challenge for our young people, some of our young people in the University of the West Indies. Sir, a common thread that has run through successive administrations is the value that we have placed on education. Each government has in some ways made great strides in the investment of our citizens through education. And while we have maybe taken somewhat of a different path, we have all tried to reach the same goal of advancement through education. An integral part of that mission, ensuring tertiary training at the University of the West Indies. Mr. Speaker, that university and Bahamas relationship began in 1962 when our government established an understanding with the university for the training of medical doctors, teachers, and lawyers. And over subsequent decades, this agreement has expanded to include other disciplines such as dentistry pharmacy, nursing, social work, meteorology, veterinarian science, and others. While it has been a very good thing, certain conditions of enrollment at UWI by Bahamian students in various disciplines, especially medicine, has required this government to examine the practical effects of that 60-year understanding. Earlier this summer, an issue arose within our community about the status of first-year Bahamian medical students at UWI. Let's go back for a minute. Since coming to office, the Honorable Member of Elizabeth, the Honorable Dr. Dwayne Sands, Minister of Health, repeatedly warned that the number of students studying medicine at UWI cannot be sustained in the Princess Margaret Hospital or the Rand Memorial Hospital, because at their numbers, they would be without the benefit of proper, valuable, necessary internship training and post-training coaching. Without that discipline rigor that a profession as medicine demands, untrained or poorly trained or ill-equipped or ill-prepared doctors could and would become a serious liability to the Bahamian and visiting public. This is a risk that no government can take. This is a risk that this government will not take. In June this year, sir, 49 UWI medical students graduated as doctors here in the Bahamas. At that time, the government was only able to offer 40 positions to those 49. This year, another 44 or more is expected to graduate. And over the years, particularly the last 5 years, there has been an increasing number of UWI graduates and non-UWI graduates, Bahamians, seeking training opportunities in the country's health system. In a communication to this Honorable House in June this year, the Honorable Member for Elizabeth stated then, and I quote, "Mr. Speaker, our success has created a massive logistical, fiscal, and ethical nightmare which has human implications. The system has stretched and bent and twisted to accommodate. It is at the absolute limit and possibly a little beyond. Simultaneously, we have, as a country, continued to offer scholarships to more and more prospective UWI medical students, but we have not strengthened the capacity for postgraduate medical attention, that necessary step. Without training opportunities in post-medical school, these physicians cannot practice. This is clearly unsustainable. It is unfair to the public and to the students. We have had to resort to extraordinary measures to ensure that this has not become unsafe." End quote. In his June presentation, Mr. Speaker, Dr. Sands informed the nation that the government will reduce the internship number over the next 2 years to 30 graduates, which, quote, would be in keeping with our initial arrangement with the university and which will accommodate the needs for national development, end quote. Mr. Speaker, Dr. Sands went on to say, and I quote, "Mr. Speaker, we will have to align all of our policies to ensure that we do not worsen the disconnect between expectation and reality. If we do not have the funds, bed space, teaching space, faculty, labs, and clinical time, we cannot, should not, and will not give scholarships to young Bahamians. That is not denying opportunity. That is investing in ultimate success, end quote. Mr. Speaker, the undisputed and maybe for some unpalatable truth is that the healthcare system of the Bahamas cannot efficiently and professionally support more than 25 interns coming into the Bahamas' system from the University of the West Indies or any other university in a particular year. It cannot, and it will not. In August this year, an official letter by Dr. Robin Roberts, director of UWI's School of Clinical Medicine and Research in the Bahamas, sent a letter and was received by the officials at UWI informing that the Bahamas' limit for scholarships this year in medicine is 25, and that only the top 25 applicants for the MBBS program at UWI should be identified and sent to us here in the Bahamas so that we may know who gets subvention and who does not. Mr. Speaker, that notice and information was not transmitted to our students. Let me say, Mr. Speaker, that since coming to office, we have met at the Scholarship Division a belief and a practice by some that once accepted at UWI in a medical science program, one automatically gets a scholarship. That is the case, sir, and obviously it has been. Then through this communication today, I ask the Bahamian people to listen very carefully. As of this moment, sir, here and now, all prospective UWI students or candidates seeking admission into the medical, dentistry, pharmacy, nursing, or veterinarian programs, once accepted, must first receive approval in writing from the Ministry of Health before the Ministry of Education will consider or approve tuition assistance for that candidate in either of those aforementioned fields. As I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, the notice sent to the University of the West Indies, it was not transmitted to our prospective candidates and or students. Therefore, the government will pay the subvention for all first-year Bahamian medical students now enrolled at the University of the West Indies. We will pay that official list that will be provided by the university. While here, Mr. Speaker, it should be noted that scholarship or tuition assistance is not a right. The government will do and has done everything in its power to train and educate its citizens. It recognizes and appreciates the value of tertiary education, which is why the Honorable Member for Kalani, the Prime Minister, has stated that next year, tuition at the University of the Bahamas will be free for all qualified and accepted Bahamian candidates. That is why tuition at BTVI is now free for all qualified Bahamian students, because we believe and recognize of training's critical and indispensable value. But we also must accept, Mr. Speaker, and admit that we cannot financially support more medical students into the system than can be safely, efficiently, and professionally absorbed in any given year. Notwithstanding the information provided earlier, sir, that we had informed the UWI of only 25 medical students to be accepted and supported financially by the Bahamas government, we nevertheless sought to obtain from UWI, after a relentless pursuit of the accurate figures of the Bahamian population of the 3 UWI campuses, namely Mona in Jamaica, Cave Hill in Barbados, and St. Augustine's in Trinidad. Those statistics state the following. There are presently 57 first-year medical students at the 3 campuses. 9 at Cave Hill, 12 at Mona, 36 at St. Augustine. There are 33 in the 2nd year and 44 in the 3rd year. The 44, if they finish their program at the end of this academic training year, will come home to the Bahamas and start their clinical training in 2009 at either PMH or the ranch. That joins, Mr. Speaker, the 40 that were accepted in such a program this year. There is a total enrollment of 252 Bahamian students across many disciplines in the University of the West Indies, like those mentioned earlier. In total, Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas government is now subsidizing the education of 134 medical students at the University of the West Indies. If all of those subventions across those 3 campuses and local UWI program were totaled, we would be paying this year $9,474,576. That's $9.4 million, Mr. Speaker, of the $17.8 million spent on all scholarships. That's 53%. In other words, more than half of all the scholarship monies paid by the government is paid to the University of the West Indies. That must be recalculated and revisited. There is a need for doctors in our system, Mr. Speaker. Yes, there is also a need for radiographers, lab technicians, medical technologists, nurses, patient care specialists, occupational therapists, phlebotomists, surgical technologists, and physician's assistants. Also, Mr. Speaker, please be informed of this. Next year, next academic year, the Bahamas government will support no more than 10 students for the medicine program at UWI. And in the year 2020 academic year, sir, the government of the Bahamas will support no more than 10 students for medicine in the University of the West Indies. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Order that the communication be brought up. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Ingliston.
Wondering if the member for South Beach, I heard what he said, whether he could advise that includes the 4 students who are enrolled in the currently enrolled in the dentistry program. Thank you, and I thank the member.
Further statements and communications by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member. Order that the communication will lie on the table. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Garden Hill.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I deemed it an honor to stand here today to make this communication to this House about the National Public Service Week and the week of activities within the public service I note, Mr. Speaker, that you have already recognized our special guests, candidates, and the committee members. And I want to take this opportunity to formally also recognize and welcome Ms. Delabo, a member of the Public Service Commission, who is also seated in the gallery. Mr. Speaker, the public service is in celebration mode in its preparation for the 18th National Public Service Week, which is scheduled for beginning this coming Saturday, the 27th of October, to Sunday, the 4th of November. This year, we will inspire and motivate workers throughout the public service as we present and explore all that the public service has to offer. Under the theme, the public service, igniting a positive change for future generations. Mr. Speaker, the public offices are dedicated to the public good. We are challenged every day to advancing public service efficiently, effectively, and equitably, with a general focus on the public good of its citizens. This mission requires an unprecedented level of understanding and cooperation. So today, the activities and celebrations this week represents a new call for action, and we in the public service must answer that call. Mr. Speaker, and Bahamians everywhere will have an opportunity to see and hear from retirees who have contributed significantly to the growth and development of our great public service. They will be introduced to some of the brightest minds and best talent and most talented individuals in the service as we showcase public officers of the year from the various ministries and departments. Mr. Speaker, of great excitement perhaps will be the parliamentary session that is planned, where members from the public service or candidates will come into this parliament and celebrate and show us how it must be done. Mr. Speaker, we will enjoy the creative spirit of workers as they display the role of their various ministries and departments in a float parade. I am advised, Mr. Speaker, that this is really going to be something to see, as each ministry and department will be on the town rolling about and displaying their ministry. As you know, Mr. Speaker, the public service is that engine that runs the country to ensure that the mandate of the government is fulfilled. We are committed to provide education and health services, individual protection, and national security. We are mandated to ensure that the infrastructure is developed properly and a stable economy is maintained, just to name a few of our services. The Ministry of Public Service and National Insurance is aware of this charge, this very important charge. And we hope that we can continue to enhance the quality of life for our public officers so that we may gain the maximum benefit from their services. In this vein, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Public Service and National Insurance continue in its role to implement strategies to identify and manage talent, to promote and compensate deserving officers, provide training and opportunities many times at the expense of the government. Utilize technologies to improve the way we do business and provide also a healthy and safe working environment for public officers. You will note from my communications, Mr. Speaker, that the public service and public servants are so important that we have set aside 9 days to celebrate and to recognize them for the work that they are doing and for them to bring to fruition the mandate of the government, which ultimately affects the performance of our country. An activity is scheduled for each day, Mr. Speaker, and we begin this Saturday, the 27th of October, with a health fun run and walk, which begins at 6 a.m., leaving from the fort's entrance at the Botanical Gardens. And upon completion of this activity, everyone is invited to participate in the free health screening event that begins at 10 and ends by 12 noon. Mr. Speaker, just to make sure the nation gets it right, we expect that every single member of Parliament, every single staff in all of the ministries have this T-shirt. Wear this T-shirt this coming Saturday. And we all look forward, Mr. Speaker, to being there to represent our ministries and to show the public that we care for our public officers. It's a nice pink one, and I said to my planners, Mr. Speaker, that this is in collaboration with National Cancer Month. So there's a connection between what we do in the public service and the physical and health of our nation. On Sunday, Mr. Speaker, all of the retirees and nominees will assemble at the Zion Baptist Church on East and Shirley Street at 11 a.m. for a service of praise and thanksgiving. On Monday, the 29th of October, officers from the various ministries and departments will be involved in a training session for Parliament in preparation for their mock House of Assembly appearance, which is scheduled for Tuesday, the 30th of October at 10 a.m. This event will be televised, and we anticipate an exciting and informative discourse as participants share to the theme, the public service, igniting a positive change for future generations. Mr. Speaker, I said to my officer, I may not be able to watch them live at 10 o'clock on Tuesday, but I will certainly find a tape to see what their rendition of what we do in Parliament. On Wednesday, the 31st of October, at 12 noon, the 16 representatives from the various ministries who were chosen as nominees for the National Public Service Officer of the Year Award will pay a courtesy call on the Governor General. These officers are considered, Mr. Speaker, the creme de la creme among their peers and were selected based on the following criteria: efficiency and competency in the workplace, excellent punctuality and attendance record, positive attitude towards members of the public and other stakeholders, their contribution to their ministry and department, and finally, Mr. Speaker, on their dependability and integrity. This event is a competitive and keenly contested one, and it is envisioned that the awards will serve as an inspiration for fellow officers. So on Thursday, the 1st of November at 11 a.m., The retirees will be honored in a recognition ceremony at Government House. On Friday, the 2nd of October, it will be T-shirt day. And the highly contested float parade will begin at 8 a.m. At 6 p.m., it's a volleyball tournament at D.W. Davis Gymnasium. And public servants will demonstrate their competitive spirit as they endeavor to seek bragging rights. The tournament continues through Saturday, the 3rd of November, all day, and ending with a politicians, both past and current, volleyball match. So I invite all politicians to start using their 3-in-1 oil to grease up those knees and ankles. WD-40 is the best one. Mr. Speaker, this week of activity will culminate in a grand style, fashion, when the country is invited to celebrate with the 16 ministries and the nominees for the Public Service Officer of the Year Award. They will all be vying for the 18th National Public Service of the Year Award. This event is planned for Sunday, the 4th of November at 3 p.m. at the Imperial Ballroom at the Atlantis Hotel. All of the ministries and departments have been encouraged to purchase tickets for this affair and to show their support for the nominees. The nominees have been judged by professionals from a cross-section of society, and we patiently await the results. Mr. Speaker, we have an exciting public service week ahead. All events have been planned with the public servants in mind, just to express how much we appreciate their services. The week promises to be one filled with fun, a week of reflection and recognition and fellowship. So, Mr. Speaker, I encourage public servants and the Bahamians at large to get ready and get involved as we ignite a positive change for future generations. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order that the communication be brought up. Order that the communication do lie on the table. Further statements and communications by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, at this juncture, I will move that the House suspends for about 10 minutes to give the Prime Minister, the leader of the opposition, the political directorate, to be able to take some photographs with our public officers who have given us yeoman's work. And Mr. Speaker, today we recognize them for that yeoman's task that they have been doing for and on behalf of the Bahamian people. So at this juncture, Mr. Speaker, I do move that the House suspends for about 10 minutes.
It has been moved and seconded that the business of this House suspend for 10 minutes. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands suspended for 10 minutes.
All right.
Honorable members, when the business of the House suspended, we will add statements and communications by ministers. Further statements and communication by ministers. Communications by the clerk. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the Senate. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign seat, and new writs. Presentation of petitions. Presentations of reports of committees. Adoption of reports of committees. First reading of bills.
None, sir.
Second reading and committal of bills. Committee of the whole House. Third reading and passing of bills. Consideration of Senate amendments. Resolutions. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Where we are, where we are headed, if I may.
Chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, Mr. Speaker, it's very unusual for Parliament to have to approve the government entering into a lease. That's unheard of, but since they have adopted this process, they could do so. But it's very unusual, and it is not something that in the annals of this House you'll be able to find Parliament approving government entering into a lease. Now, in respect to this lease, a member of the legislature has an interest. And I think this is...
Honorable member.
Yes, sir. This is why I'm asking. I'm going to point to an issue. I mean, I'm trying to protect the member, if I may. When I say protect the member, I don't, because, Speaker, if a member of this House is interested or becomes interested in a government contract, he is required to vacate his seat. Disclosing his interest in that contract does not absolve him from vacating the seat. What absolves him from vacating the seat is if this House exempts him from vacating the House. So it's a two-pronged fix. That's what I'm saying. So what is required, and I refer the House leader and I speak to them, and I speak to the member particularly because he will appreciate what I'm saying. That when you look at Article 49(1) F(I), what it says,
is that the Constitution?
Yes. And I ask you to look at it as well. No, but he got the exemption. No, I'm not. That's another matter. No, I'm not saying I don't. Yeah, yes, but he got the exemption as required. Right here, you supported it. No, the exemption. The exemption. No, that's not. 49, and I mean, we could all look at it. I mean, it's a matter. The point I'm making, Mr. Speaker, is that the House has to come to the conclusion that it is just for the member to be engaged in this contract, having disclosed. And then we have to, as the House has to say, he is exempted from vacating the House. So why don't we just, but you just don't do it like that. The House has to be called upon. Mr. Speaker, if in the circumstances it appears to the House of Assembly to be just to do so, so the House has to be called upon to determine whether it's just for the member to be exempted. That's all I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Right? And therefore, no. It doesn't have to be a contract. What it speaks to, right, if he becomes interested, right, or is about to become interested. Well, I mean, I didn't want to carry. Before, what, read it? Before becoming interested in such contract. Before becoming interested. So you don't need to have the contract. You're about to enter, before you become interested in that contract, the exemption is required. And so the House has to be called upon, we have to be called upon to determine whether it is just for the member to be exempted from vacating the seat. That's what I'm saying. And then you could move to determine, then we can have a debate on the other issues that attend to the lease, since you've now brought it here for us to approve.
Honorable members, just a moment. This is for future notices, honorable members, that whenever, particularly such a notice or a member wishes to bring to the attention of the House, the rules provide for that member to present what he intends to present to the House to the Speaker a minimum of 1 hour prior to the House convening, to avoid this very circumstance that we are faced with now. Now, the proviso, I just want to read into the record of the House so that members can act accordingly. Under Article 49 of the Constitution, there is a proviso which says, 1, if in the circumstances it appears to the House of Assembly to be just to do so, the House of Assembly may exempt any member of the House from vacating his seat under the provisions of this subparagraph, if that member, before becoming interested in such contract as aforesaid, or as soon as practicable after becoming so interested, discloses to the House the nature of such contract and his interest therein. And so I would assume, honorable member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador, what your intervention is that we are at that point where the House, the member, you're calling on the member to disclose his interest?
Yes, Speak. What has happened is that in the resolution itself, it alludes to a member being interested in the contract which they're asking us to approve. That member has not yet disclosed that interest. Disclosure in and of itself is not sufficient to exempt him from vacating the seat. That exemption comes about from a assent from the House having determined that it's just to do so.
Honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Speaker, in order to try and resolve where we are,
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Senat.
in order to help the honourable member for Cat Island and the honourable House, the resolution itself speaks to a beneficial ownership of a member sitting. Without saying it, they're obviously talking about myself.
Don't tell me what. You're going to hear me. You're going to hear me.
wonderful to be the first in history. It's wonderful to be the first in history to have such a debate. I've had many other firsts, so now it's another first. Mr. Speaker, with your leave, I beg leave to lay on the table the annual statement for Blue Hill Shopping Road Centre Limited, which has been stamped in the Registry General October the 4th, 2018, which discloses the shareholders of Blue Hill Road Shopping Centre. And for the record, they are myself, 81 shares, my wife, 1 share, Dion Dean, Laura Smith, and Randy Smith at 1 share, BHRSC Holdings Limited, 9,610 shares out of 10,000, Furniture Plus, Tops and Jeans, and 71% Holdings Limited. I also beg leave to lay on the table the annual statement for BHRSC Holding Limited, which was filed in the Registry of Records, Registrar General's Department, the 21st of November 2017, which shows there are 5,000 shares in that, of which my brother owns 2,500 shares, I own 2,496, and there are 4 nominee shares, which are 3 nominee shares, which are nominee for myself, and the 4th share is my wife. As you can see from here, BHRSC Holdings owns 9,610 of the 10,000 shares. A company by the name of 71% Holdings Limited owns 113 shares, which is either myself, my wife, or my children, but it's me for all intents and purposes, and I own 81 other shares. So I trust that solves the problem where so that's the number 1 issue that I have declared my interest. Now the House can do what they want from there.
Order that the documents to lie on the table. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, given where we are in our proceedings, Mr. Speaker, we do move that the House,
honourable members,
that the House would exempt the member from vacating his seat as we proceed in this debate to do what we have purposed in our heart to do today, which is to have a discussion on this first in this honorable House. So I so move, Mr. Speaker.
I second that, Mr. Speaker.
It has been moved. It has been moved and seconded that pursuant to Article 49 of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, that the honourable member for St. Anne's be exempt from vacating his seat, having disclosed his interests in a government contract or lease. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand.
No resident, but I want
Honourable member?
Speaker, I just want to say something on the resolution. Yeah, practical question.
Yes.
Yeah.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just want to say on our side that we here, as members of the House of Assembly, do not deem it just to allow the member not to vacate his seat as a result of the disclosure this morning. I will be saying no to the exemption for reasons that we will provide during the course of the debate on the resolution.
That's why we're on the debate.
I don't know if they want. That's that.
As many?
It's the question. Please put the question.
It has been moved and seconded that pursuant to Article 49 of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, that the member for St. Anne's, having disclosed his interests in a government contract, be exempt by this honorable House from vacating his seat. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The resolution has been passed, and the member is thereby exempt from vacating his seat.
Come back, Brad. Come back to your seat. You ain't got no that. Yes, sir. Watch them cats go.
You need the resolution?
Yeah. I'm about to turn on, my brother.
Give me a copy of the resolution and give it to the speaker. Where's Andrew?
The one with you.
Yes.
I
need to write it up.
Do you direct it? Someone needs to just write that resolution right quick. So that you can sign it. Okay?
Yes, David, write the resolution.
The one that you just read. Yeah. Just write it quick so that we can sign it. And then write the character. Mr. Speaker, in the interest of time, while that particular resolution is being passed so that we can sign it, Mr. Speaker, we will proceed. It's being drafted.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
What a day, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in this honorable house today giving praise to the Lord of life, as I usually do. Adonai Sabayot, the Lord of hosts. Mr. Speaker, the Hebrew literal translation means the God of the angelic army of heaven. Mr. Speaker, indeed he is our King and our Redeemer. And the good book says that to the increase of his government and his kingdom, there shall be no end. Mr. Speaker, I also want to thank the good people of Bamboo Town for the opportunity once again in this place to give value to their voice and voice to their values. As I stand to move this resolution seeking the approval of this honorable house to enter a lease agreement for the post office building, the GPO, for 5 years with the principal owners of the town center mall. And Mr. Speaker, as I proceed through this debate, I want the Bahamian people to know that we have here represented in this house, in the gallery, my permanent secretary, Ms. Cora B. Colebrook, my undersecretary, Mr. Lewis, and members of the post office leadership and staff, Mr. Perry McCarty, Ms. Patricia Curry, Ms. Claudine Bethel Delancey, Ms. Aurelia Butler, Ms. Sheila Gibson, and Ms. Maybelline Miller, who happens to be the mother of our most celebrated track and field athlete, Shawnee Miller-Rebo. Mr. Speaker, the post office is an essential service, and its full operational capacity must be realized now, not sometime down the road, Mr. Speaker, but now. The current state of affairs for the members of the post office working half days at the GPO for the past 2 years has severely affected the revenue, which has dropped from around $5.5 million in 2012 to around $2 million in 2017. These losses reflected in revenue from sale of stamps, receipt of post readers, payment of foreign mail delivery, rent of private mailboxes, receipts in cash for repayment, commission on postal money orders, miscellaneous postal revenue, and air terminal charges. The lack of timely mail delivery to businesses has had a similar effect on the private sector's bottom line. So much so that on Thursday, the 5th of July, 2018,
3 short months ago. The Tribune business reporter, Mr. Natario McKinsey, quoted the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce and Employees Confederation, now former Chief Executive Officer Mr. Edison Sumner, as saying that he knew of Bahamian businesses who had purchased Florida mailboxes and were traveling to the U.S. on a weekly basis as a costly, time-consuming alternative to beating the postal shutdown. Mr. Speaker, I want that to sink in for a minute into the hearing of the Bahamian people and this honorable House. Business persons had resorted to going to Florida in order to ensure that they receive their mails on time. Mr. Speaker, this current state of affairs of the post office is indefensible, unacceptable, and has been a bane of contention for this current Free National Movement administration and the last PLP administration. Contrary to common perceptions, Mr. Speaker, technological advances have not made the National Postal Service irrelevant. In fact, given that we live in an archipelagic nation, the Postal Service continues to play a vital role in the field of communications by keeping its customers informed and connected around the world. Centuries ago, Mr. Speaker, in addition to transporting mail, the Postal Service established a savings bank and a postal money order system, as many family island communities had no other financial facilities available to them. In fact, many of our residents, Mr. Speaker, in the family islands and some here in New Providence were unable to meet the strict requirements of commercial banks. Hence, the post office bank became an essential banking service. It should be noted, Mr. Speaker, that by happenstance, the domestic gaming houses for a time took over this function of money transfer among the family islands. Mr. Speaker, the Postal Service has grown and improved tremendously over the years. Today, there are post offices strategically located throughout New Providence with a total of 24,750 private mail boxes. In addition, each populated island in the Bahamas has postal service. There are currently some 40 post offices in the family islands, and where there is no physical building structure of a post office, postal workers function even from their homes on every inhabited population center in this country. In furtherance of our duty, Mr. Speaker, over the next year, we will seek to add more private mailboxes here in New Providence and the family islands. Mr. Speaker, it is a well-known and universally accepted fact that for the last 3 years, the ability of the General Post Office to deliver satisfactory service to the Bahamian people, particularly in New Providence, is severely afflicted and has a domino effect on the family islands. Added to that, in 2007, the Ministry of Finance's internal audit report on the adverse conditions at the GPO identified the need for immediate, I want to say it again, Mr. Speaker, immediate 2007 mandatory attention be given to the physical working environment of the GPO on East Hill Street. The Ministry of Finance, in a subsequent 2013 internal audit report, again reiterated the urgent need for the working environment to be addressed for workers remaining at the GPO on East Hill Street. Mr. Speaker, I want you to hear me. With the exception of the General Post Office and a small number of customs officers who had remained to work under these most disgraceful conditions, Mr. Speaker, and I call them disgraceful. Mr. Speaker, I want to applaud the workers of the post office and those customs officers, because it could only be for love of country that they would have endured such a situation. Mr. Speaker, from the time the Ministry of Works structural engineers signaled concerns for the GPO building in 2007, there has been a steady exit of 3 of the 4 government agencies that were housed in that building. With the exception of the GPO, all other tenants have moved out into very good working spaces. There were 4 tenants in that building: the General Post Office, the Ministry of Transport, the AG's office, and Social Services. The Attorney General's office. Thank you, Angliston. The Ministry of Transport amalgamated with the Ministry of Works in 2007 and headed on out. The Attorney General's office moved to what is now called the Paul L. Adley building at the end of 2013. And the Ministry of Social Services moved to the Avonshaw Plaza on JFK Drive in 2014. Mr. Speaker, in August of 2011, the damage done by Hurricane Irma to the GPO and subsequent mold issues and air quality issues, which continued from 2007, by the way, gravely affected the operations of the post office. These long-standing insufficiencies have been corroborated and documented by the Ministry of Public Works and the Ministry of the Environment. Both ministries, Mr. Speaker, over the years gave contracts for millions of dollars for major mold remediation works, air quality works, infrastructural works, a new elevator installation, roof membrane repair, new HVAC systems repairs and maintenance, major plumbing works inclusive of water pumps and holding tanks, as well as plumbing fixtures and major electrical works inclusive of switching gear replacements and the main disconnect switch to the building. Mr. Speaker, it is noteworthy that the millions spent since 2007 on the various patchworks, I call them, to the building were done so that the building could limp along as a somewhat habitable workspace for the various government agencies that were housed in that building. Mr. Speaker, after all of the patchwork and the continued need for more patchwork and maintenance work, it was not until 2016, 4 years into the then PLP administration, that a definitive decision was taken to have the staff of the last government agencies, the department in the building, to have the GPO relocated from the building on East Hill Street. It is noteworthy. It is noteworthy. Well, according to the cabinet paper, cabinet conclusion to this, okay? It is also noteworthy. I said definitive. I didn't say decision, definitive. It is also noteworthy that we are now in 2018. And even before 17 months into this F&M administration, we too have taken a decisive decision to immediately remove the post office staff from the building on East Hill Street, and God willing, ahead of Christmas Day, before the end of the year, we will do just that. Mr. Speaker, it is the people's time. Mr. Speaker, for the GPO staff and for the general public, I say it again, it is the people's time. Mr. Speaker, the record does reflect, perhaps this is what Angliston was referring to, that in 2013, the former administration sought alternatives for the GPO staff. Thereafter, the Ministry of the Public Service engaged in an exhaustive exercise to identify a site which could accommodate the GPO's unique operational needs. At least 8 buildings were identified. The Royal Bank of Canada building, East Bay Street and Victoria Avenue. Old Island Traders building, East Bay Street, that currently houses the Ministry of Agriculture and Marine Resource. Avonshaw building, Madeira Street. I believe social services might be in that one. City Market building, East West Highway. The former Royal Bank office suite, John F. Kennedy Drive. The former Roberts Furniture building, Bay Street. The former Best Buy building, Village Road. Independence Shopping Center Complex, Tony Williams Darling Highway, and the Town Center Mall Complex building on Blue Hill Road and Tony Williams Darling Highway. Mr. Speaker, various logistic theories were entertained in regards to what the movement of the GPO would look like. However, Mr. Speaker, they all point to the fact that the unique functioning of the General Post Office would not allow for its various units to be separated from one another without adversely affecting its operational efficiency and effectiveness. In particular, this contiguity is required to ensure that the mail is sorted and delivered to all other post offices in New Providence and on the Family Islands on a timely basis. The height of the interior ceiling space of the GPO and size of sorting rooms must comport with our obligations to the Universal Postal Union. And we're going to see that that happens in the Town Center Mall. Mr. Speaker, the move also provides that the letter boxes at the GPO must be relocated as well to ensure public safety, since concrete occasionally fell from ceiling spaces both inside and outside of the GPO building. Additionally, substantial parking spaces is also required for the staff of the GPO and the visiting public. Mr. Speaker, it should be noted that the General Post Office is in the process of completing negotiations with FedEx International for a package delivery partnership. The GPO is also considering a partnership with Digital to Print for the production of web-based legal documents which are used by accounting and legal firms. These alliances, Mr. Speaker, will boost profitability and move the post office operations into the modern era. They definitely, Mr. Speaker, will require us to find additional accommodation on the same site of the GPO. Mr. Speaker, as conditions in the post office continue to worsen, in 2016, Cabinet agreed in principle to the relocation of the GPO from the East Hill Street to the Town Center Mall, subject to a team comprising the Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister of Works and Urban Development at the time, that is the member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador, the Minister of Transport and Aviation at the time, that is the member of Angliston, the Minister of the Public Service, who was then the Honorable D. Sheehan Gibson, and the Minister of State in the Ministry of Finance, the then Honorable Michael Halkitis, to verify the availability of purchase of the Town Center Mall or the Independent Shopping Center or other appropriate premises which could readily accommodate the relocation of the main post office building from East Hill Street. Mr. Speaker, Cabinet further agreed to continue negotiations by the Ministries of Public Service, Public Works, and Urban Development, and Transport and Aviation, with the management of the Town Center Mall, with a view to government undertaking the necessary renovations of the Town Center Mall. Mr. Speaker, this was confirmed by the leader of the opposition about 2 days ago in The Guardian. He reported that the PLP's administration thought it prohibitive for government to spend the projected $4 million to, well, I say 4. The paper said 4. Okay. Well, you could put it on, you could correct the, you could put yours on record. To renovate the Town Center Mall as a home for the GPO. Having taken that decision, having taken the decision that the PLP would not go in the Town Center Mall, the Progressive Liberal Party's government looked at other locations at the top of their list. The PLP's cabinet agreed to the purchase of the Independent Shopping Center at a price to be agreed with the Minister of Finance, the Minister of the Public Service, and the Ministry of Transport and Aviation, not to exceed $4 million. That 4 keep coming up. I hope nobody. Yeah, I hope nobody plays that number. Eh? Cabinet further agreed that the DPM and the Minister of Works and Urban Development, that is the member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador, should identify and negotiate with an appropriate contractor for the renovation works at the Independence Shopping Center. Mr. Speaker, knowing that the PLP had taken that decision, or the government of the day had taken that decision, something confuddles me, and seemed to have confuddled even the minister, the member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador in May of 2017. Because you see, the works on the shopping center, the Independence Shopping Center, started without obtaining a valid building permit, and the member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador issued a stop order on the work. Now, Mr. Speaker, imagine that.
He didn't agree?
Imagine that.
Yeah.
That the minister was to negotiate with a contractor. His ministry would have been tasked with the responsibility of ensuring that drawings were approved, that the requisite meetings with stakeholders according to the Subdivision Act would have been done, and then you would have proceeded to do the requisite construction works. The minister, realizing that that had not taken place, did what he ought to by law and put a stop order on the works. I hope that suffices.
That's good.
The good minister, former minister. Mr. Speaker, the Town Center Mall has long been identified as suitable for accommodating public services due to its capacity to accommodate large number of residents and the fact that it is centrally located in New Providence. You may recall that the mall was proposed at one point in time to be the site of the family courts in 2012 by the former administration, and that the mall has served as a center for NIB verification and voter registration over the past 5 years. The PLP, the last administration, having abandoned the move to the Town Center Mall, then through the Ministry of Finance, entered into discussion with the owners of the Independent Shopping Center, or the City Market Complex on Tolleeks Williams Darling. That is the LaGrange Investment Company Limited, whose president is Scott Cadet. The government eventually arrived at an agreement with LaGrange Investment to purchase the City Market Complex at a cost not to exceed $4 million. Boy, that 4 keeps coming up. With renovations requiring an additional $4 to $5 million. Meanwhile, the proposed renovations for the Town Center Mall at the time was estimated between $3.5 to $5 million. So, Mr. Speaker, you can have your time. You can put it on record. So, Mr. Speaker, the move to the Town Center Mall was abandoned in favor of the City Market Independent Shopping Center right across the street from the Town Center Mall. Subsequent to Cabinet's decision, I am advised that a $2 million down payment is made to LaGrange Investments and a $1 million to the selected contractor, with $600,000 having been spent to date on the project for works done at the site. So as it stands now, Mr. Speaker, the government of the Bahamas has currently invested some $3.6 million in that Independence shopping site across the road. 3.6. I believe they may have tried to correct that. As I indicated before, from the start of the project at the Independence site, there was clearly a disconnect between the Ministry of Public Works and the Ministry of the Public Service regarding this project. The plan for the modification of the buildings on the site had not received the Ministries of Public Works approval. The residents of the area objected to the GPO being placed in the Independent Shopping Center as they were not consulted. And issues were compounded by what the resident says was traffic congestion. Having complained and campaigned on this issue, and having been elected in May of 2017, this Free National Movement administration under the leadership of Dr. Minnis, Prime Minister, heeded the cries of the residents of the Blue Hills subdivision and halted the project. Mr. Speaker, it should be noted that while all of the discussions and works was being done in regards to the GPO, Hurricane Matthew struck in September of 2016, inflicting further damage to the GPO on East Hill Street. The former Minister of Transport and Aviation, the member for Engliston, was gravely concerned about the state of the GPO, and it was agreed that in the interim, while the works would have been done at the town center, at the Independent Shopping Center, that additional works would be done on the GPO building on East Street to make it habitable while a suitable permanent home was being constructed. Mr. Speaker, it was also projected that these works would cost, you guessed the number, eh? $4 million.
That's what I guess. I guess it was $4 million.
However, these works on the GPO site were continued. These works on the GPO site was discontinued. And Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure why. I was drilling down into the file, but I'm not sure why the works were stopped some months prior to May 2017, prior to the general elections. But Mr. Speaker, the work stoppage was viewed with much concern on the part of the staff in the GPO building, who were looking forward to some temporary relief to their abysmal working conditions. Mr. Speaker, my most recent predecessor and colleague, Minister of Transport and Local Government, the Honorable Frankie Campbell, aggressively sought immediate solutions to the working conditions of the public officers at the GPO on East Hill Street. Under Cabinet's instructions, he sought and identified the former Phil's Food Service building on Gladstone Road as a possible site for the relocation of the GPO. The Phil's building was one of a number of buildings within the Bank of the Bahamas Resolve Holdings. But Mr. Speaker, due to the urgency of the matter and the concern of the minister, the government was eager to commence the transformation of Phil's Food Store Service into the GPO, and hence the decision was taken to acquire the building post haste in the public interest. This acquisition, Mr. Speaker, I believe was completed in March of 2017. I'm advised that the renovations for the Phil's Food Service building were also expected to cost
$4 million.
$4 million. I'm further advised, Mr. Speaker, that though and once the government took possession of the building, it was discovered that the building was stripped of electrical wirings, plumbing, and air conditioning components that were intended to be a part and parcel of the new renovations. This act of vandalism greatly increased the construction cost and the construction timeline. Mr. Speaker, from the time this administration signaled that we were interested in Phil's and announced that to the public, and the time we compulsorily acquired the building, when we said we were interested in the building and inspected the building, it was in one state. It had the air conditioning units, it had the electrical wiring. Based on the Ministry of Works projection, a certain cost would have been required to make that building functional for the post office, given that those components was in there. When we finally acquired the building, to our surprise and dismay, what we left was not what we thought. After an assessment by the Ministry of Public Works, it was determined that the design, because it had to be redesigned, for the building that we intended was incomplete. And as a result of that, a minimum of 1 year would be required to complete the drawings and the necessary renovations. And as a result, the cost to renovate Phil's would far exceed the $4 million allocated for the project. Mr. Speaker, at this juncture, it is critical that the issues in the GPO, which has compromised the safety of staff and the general public for an unacceptable and protracted period, are urgently addressed. We, therefore, have agreed that the town center mall, which offers over 500 parking spaces for use by the public, is centrally located within New Providence, is a hub for numerous bus routes, and is bounded by major roadways offering multiple options of ingress and egress, should be considered. The fact that Barclays Bank, Mr. Speaker, was once located in Town Center Mall, and Commonwealth Bank is currently housed there, augurs well for the relocation of the post office bank to that space. Mr. Speaker, Town Center Mall offers a wonderful solution to our dilemma and should be again considered as the most viable solution to this vexing problem. And Mr. Speaker, on the 21st of September 2018, my ministry initiated and requested and received a proposal from the Town Center Mall, where the principals of the Town Center Mall agreed to: 1, construction of the facility in regards to the fixed assets normally associated with electrical, HVAC, air conditioning, plumbing, drywall, and flooring, that would be done by the landlord. That will be done by the landlord at no cost to the government. The electrical works, the air conditioning works, the plumbing works. That's the MEP. The drywall works, that has to do with the interior walls and the flooring, would be done by the landlord at no cost to the government. That's the entire MEP project. Okay? That's MEP and Builders Works. The facility, second, to that, Mr. Speaker, the principals of the town center mall have agreed that the facility would be ready to receive contractors to work at a moment's notice. And that we would be ready, given that we make that decision quickly, that we would be ready to move the post office into the building by the 15th of December, 2018. Mr. Speaker, given the fact that we are a week behind in this debate, we've been asked to push that back by 1 week, so we're looking just before Christmas to be in that place. And I'm going to be putting my project management's hat on to ensure that we get that work done. Between myself and the architect, we have some MEP and Builders Works persons here. Mr. Speaker, I'm further advised that the town center mall is willing to enter into a 5-year lease with the government of the Bahamas to provide the needed space at a cost of $12 per square foot. Less than half of the threshold, $25 per square foot for the lease of the space facilities to the government. Mr. Speaker, the government is currently looking at renting some 69,875 square feet of space in the town center mall. 56,646 square feet on the ground floor and 13,229 square feet on the second floor. Mr. Speaker, we may ultimately need to rent an additional 5,000 square feet since we are looking to enter agreements with FedEx and DigiPrint. Both entities will require additional space, and as I stated earlier, we will be adding additional post office boxes. As I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, I want to reiterate here. The owners of the mall, not the government of the Bahamas, would need to invest the approximate $3.5 million into renovating the facility to make it adequate for the GPO. Mr. Speaker, an urgent decision must be taken on the provisions of a temporary home for the GPO until a decision is taken concerning a permanent one. This decision will give us 5 years of comfort. I want to say it again. This decision will give us 5 years of comfort for the staff of the GPO while we make that decision to locate and construct a permanent home for the GPO. It is my prayer, Mr. Speaker, that this House is unanimous on the way ahead for this essential service. Given what we know of that building, and I think before members should have stood up in this place and talked, they should have gone to the post office and taken a look at that facility. And I want to say again, Mr. Speaker, given what we know of that building, it is my prayer that this House is unanimous on the way forward for this essential service. I now move that the House to pass the resolution, and as the mover, I'm required to read this resolution, so I'm going to read it. Whereas the General Post Office building on East Hill Street in the city of Nassau has been condemned as being structurally unsound while suffering also from periodic deep-rooted mold infestation, particularly black mold and other harmful environmental pathogens. And whereas staff working in the General Post Office have taken repeated industrial action complaining that the working conditions in the existing buildings are inhumane and insufferable, and whereas efforts to build a new post office building at the Independent Shopping Center were met with resounding objections and rejections by the residents of the surrounding communities who asserted that their quality of life would be irredeemably negatively affected by such a structure in the shopping center. And whereas the government has worked assiduously to identify a suitable alternative to relocate the General Post Office, and in particular acquire the old Phil Food Services building on Gladstone Road, but only recently discovered that the latent hidden structural defects and other technical issues would require a massive expenditure of taxpayers' monies to conduct extensive renovation to the building, to the entire building, which would take at least a year or more, and so would not provide the timely relief for customers and staff of the General Post Office who have suffered for so many years. And whereas the owners of the Town Center Mall, situated at the northeast intersection of Blue Hill and Independence Drive, have agreed to rent suitable space for the relocation of all functions of the General Post Office to that site at the generous and commercially concessionary rate of $12 per square foot, far below the going commercial rates for businesses premises in the island of New Providence. And whereas one of the beneficial owners of the said Town Center Mall is a serving cabinet minister who did not take part in the discussions leading to the decision to accept the offer to lease portions of the building, which will be made suitable for the operations of the General Post Office at the expense of the landlord, which minister has nonetheless declared his interest in this house. Now be it therefore resolved that this House does approve the government entering into a 5-year leasehold agreement with the landlord of the Town Center Mall for the relocation of all functions of the General Post Office, pending the construction of a new General Post Office by the government by way of a public-private partnership. Mr. Speaker, we need the GPO. Mr. Speaker, we need our mail. And Mr. Speaker, we need both. Now, Mr. Speaker, I started this debate by speaking about the Lord of life. Mr. Speaker, this move for me is about life and limb for our people and for our health, their health, and our well-being. Mr. Speaker, Elder Jack N. Gerard says that if there is anything in your life you need to consider, now, not tomorrow, go ahead, Rev. Now is the time. It is time for us to move on this decision, Mr. Speaker. It is time for us to bring relief to the workers of the GPO, yes, and to the Bahamian public, yes, and to the rest of this Bahamas, Mr. Speaker. Yes. After all, it is the people's time. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there a seconder? Is there a seconder? The chair recognizes the honorable member for Garden Hills.
Twice in one day. Mr. Speaker, I'm indeed honored to be in this place and to represent the people from the great constituency of Garden Hills. They sent me to this place, Mr. Speaker, to represent them, to speak on their behalf, and to ensure that the government listens to their plight. And I'll speak, Mr. Speaker, for a little while about the post office being placed in the Garden Hills constituency. But before I get to that, Mr. Speaker, I'll start by saying I'm indeed honored to have been working in the Ministry of Transport, and I know the plight of those individuals who work in the General Post Office. And for a short period, I worked in the building that housed the post office. And so, Mr. Speaker, it is from that perspective that I will speak. And firstly, Mr. Speaker, I just calculated, Mr. Speaker, that because of the problem in the post office, because of the problems in the post office, Mr. Speaker, the post office is now working 1,575 hours. The normal working hours in the post office in that facility by workers based on the number of persons employed should be 4,200 hours. A gigantic loss in productivity and a telling loss that has manifested itself in the health of those individuals who work in that building. The government leader spoke, and the MP for Bamboo Town spoke at length about what was taking place, and so I just want to add to what he said, Mr. Speaker. He spoke about the general problems that started in 2007, and by 2010, Mr. Speaker, two other problems came to the fore in that building. The air condition became a problem, and mold was identified in that building. This, in my view, Mr. Speaker, was the beginning state for disrepair and the health and welfare issues that plagued the General Post Office. Then by 2012, Mr. Speaker, another problem emerged, the whole problem of water and leaks in that building, which interrupted and in some instances disabled the bathrooms in the buildings. And so, Mr. Speaker, I understand their pain, and no one in the public service should be working under those conditions in that building. And so I applaud the workers from the General Post Office who have stayed the course, who have worked hard, who continue to work in those conditions. By 2015, Mr. Speaker, and that's where I'm going to start my contribution in this debate. By 2015, the PLP government set out to form a committee to examine the problems of the post office, to find a space, a working space for the post office. And as my colleague said, they identified 5 places in New Providence. 8 spaces in New Providence. I have it right before me. Yes. 8 spaces as a place. And finally, Mr. Speaker, that's when the process began. And finally, Mr. Speaker, this committee that had a duty to advise the Prime Minister and the Cabinet of what was the best option that they had. And they came back, Mr. Speaker, and told the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, indeed the government of the Bahamas, that the best place they could find, Mr. Speaker, is the town center mall. That's their conclusion. The best place they could find, Mr. Speaker. And you can challenge it, but I get the green and the yellow paper.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island, Rumpke, and San Salvador.
At no time did the administration which I served determine that town center mall was the best place for it. Never.
Mr. Speaker.
In fact, Mr. Speaker, as we could realize today, and why we are debating this resolution today, our administration rejected the town center mall.
Mr. Speaker.
I'm surprised, very surprised, that the member of Parliament for Cat Island would make that statement. That statement is regrettable and unfortunate. Regrettable, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the interesting thing about this, Mr. Speaker, the member for Cat Island knows fully well that the ministry that has responsibility for,
Honorable member, the member for, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island.
What my point of order was that the member said that our administration deemed the town center mall as the best place for the post office. I asked him to establish it. He didn't say one of the best. You don't have to answer him yet. Don't give him no answer yet. That's what he said. And he either I said that is not so. As he indicated, it was not so, and I asked him to withdraw it. And in fact, the reason why we're debating this today is because our administration had in fact rejected it. So he either withdraw it or substantiate it. Yeah, read the conclusions. Yeah, read it.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Garden Hills.
Mr. Speaker, the member of Parliament for Cat Island, Rumpkin, San Salvador, again misquoted me. I said, Mr. Speaker, I said the committee recommended to Cabinet the town center mall. The committee recommended to the Prime Minister that the town center mall was the best location. In fact, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member.
The committee.
You could. Yes.
Honorable members.
Listen. Listen. Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to be trapped into them. What I'm going to say to you, Mr. Speaker, that the two members who are opposing and
honorable members.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if the member for Cat Island can take my time, I could sit down. I'm sure he's...
Honorable members, if I can clear this up a bit. The member indicated initially that it was the best location, that the government. He then came back and he indicated that the committee,
the Cabinet Committee,
reported to the Prime Minister. He said that he came, honorable member for Cat Island, honorable member, honorable member. Honorable members, I'm trying to see if I can bring a resolution to this. I'm trying to see if I can bring a resolution to this dispute. The member changed his statement after your objection, and he said that a committee reported to the former Prime Minister that the location was the best location. Are you prepared to accept that?
That's concerned with this. I was a part of that committee. I was a part of that committee. And I was not aware of that committee making such statement to the Prime Minister.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Garden Hills.
Mr. Speaker, I am resolute in my position. resolute in my position, Mr. Speaker, that the Member of Parliament for Cat Island and the Member of Parliament for Angliston served on a special committee to look at accommodations in the public service. They came back to the Cabinet of the Bahamas. The Minister of Public Service, right before me. The Minister of Public Service, the Minister for Cat Island, the MP for Cat Island, the MP for Angliston, the Minister of State for Finance, and the Minister for the Public Service, D. Shane Gibson. And all the records of whatever you all did on that committee is laid in the Ministry of Public Service. And I took great care in reading them, Mr. Speaker. Great care. And Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Speaker, the committee reported.
Honorable member, are you on a point of order?
Time don't go on.
The point of order?
Yes, as he continues to assert that there was some view, either by a committee appointed by Cabinet or by the Cabinet itself, that the town center mall was the best place for this sport. I asked him to establish it. I was part of Cabinet. That was never a decision of Cabinet. Secondly, I was a part of the committee. And at no time that committee came to such conclusion. He either establishes it or withdraws it. That's all. I mean, that's what they should do. But let him read it. Tell us what it is. Establish it.
It is utterly regrettable, you know, that the Member of Parliament for Cat Island would come to this place and say that they did not recommend and they did not consider the town center mall. Well, and I said, and let me finish my statement, Mr. Speaker. Let
the honorable member. Honorable member. Honorable member.
I'll restate my position, Mr. Speaker. No. Having examined, Mr. Speaker, having examined the 8 locations, having examined them all, and the member for Bamboo Town read them off, and there they are, all 8. Having examined them, this committee, headed by the Member of Parliament for Cat Island and the Member of Parliament for Golden Gates at the time, came back to the Cabinet and said, the town center mall is the place. That's the place we would wish to recommend to you to rent. In fact, they went further, Mr. Speaker, since you want to talk. They went further. They not only had a drawing of the place, they assigned workers from the post office to spaces in the town center mall. Assign them, Mr. Speaker. And I see now why, Mr. Speaker, I see now why the Member of Parliament for Cat Island is pushing back so hard. Because the next thing I can talk about is the independent shopping center. I can talk about that too. So let's push back as hard as you could. But it is a fact, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member for Cat Island, are you on a point of order?
I'm not pushing back. I'm just calling him to account for his words. He's now dropped the word best. Right? He's dropped the word best. That's what I'm doing. And people are watching, listening, and hearing. He's saying best. He's now dropped the word best. In fact, Mr. Speaker, he ought to be expunged from the record.
Mr. Speaker, what is interesting to me is I thought that the member of Cat Island and his committee would provide the Prime Minister with the best information, the best that they could find. And so I used the word best, Mr. Prime Minister. Now, if he's lying to the Prime Minister and that was not the best place to be rented, then I accept his position. But that's why I said it was the best, because I hold the position of being a cabinet minister as very responsible, Mr. Speaker, and I would give the Prime Minister the best advice. And if the member of Cat Island was not prepared to give the Prime Minister the best advice and identify the best place, then I see why him and the former Prime Minister don't hit it off. And Mr. Speaker, having advised the government and the Prime Minister to lease the town center mall, they went further, Mr. Speaker. They said, Mr. Speaker, that we will lease 2 floors in the town center mall. We don't want 1, we want 2. We have the post office down here and all the subsidiary things, and then we have a deli up on the next floor. The cafeteria. That's what we're gonna do. And they agreed, Mr. Speaker, that that was gonna take place. And so, Mr. Speaker, that was the mission. They agreed that they were going to lease the town center mall. They identified the spaces where people would sit, their offices will go. And then another deal came along. But before I get to that one, Mr. Speaker, you know, the whole leasing of the town center mall was going to be a major thing for the PLP. They were going to have the courts there. They were going to have other buildings there. They were going to lease this space from one Brent Simonet, who was a white man. That was a good thing, Mr. Speaker. That was a good thing to them. That's their decision, Mr. Speaker. That is what they advised the government was the best decision at the time. Until, Mr. Speaker, what I can say now, Mr. Speaker, I sit in a place where people tell you things every day, and sometimes you have to verify, and other times you just got to look at the circumstances and say, based on these set of circumstances, I could come to this conclusion. And so, it is my opinion, Mr. Speaker, that the reason why they were so interested in the town center mall, because one of their boys was buying the town center mall. And they were securing government contracts for the town center mall at the time. I just based that, Mr. Speaker, on what was happening in the background. What was happening in the background.
On a point of order, the Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Angleston.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. The member is seeking to make an allegation, and he is framing it as an opinion. As I happen to have been one of the members on that committee, I object, and I am asking him to withdraw that his assertion that the town center mall was recommended on the committee that I was a member of because one of the boys was seeking to acquire the town center mall. I don't care what the member for St. Anne's told him. I don't care, Mr. Speaker. I want that member to withdraw the speaker. I will not sit here and allow him to make that assertion. No, Speaker, I object. I'm asking him to withdraw, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member.
Mr. Speaker, I did say that based on what was happening with the town center mall at the time, a gentleman by the name of Finlayson was in discussions to buy the mall. It just happened, Mr. Speaker, that while a Finlayson fellow was trying to buy the mall, the PLP was trying to say this was a good deal. We can put the post office here. We can put the courts in here. Oh my God. That's a statement of fact, Mr. Speaker. That's a statement of fact.
Speaker, Speaker.
Honourable Member.
Yes, Speaker. I would have thought, Mr. Speaker, that the government, who is seeking to exculpate a member who has an interest in a contract that this government seeks to enter into, would seek to make their case. This member instead has sought to try and throw mud. I am asking him to withdraw that the committee that I was a member of took into consideration any individual who he names or otherwise as the basis upon which we determined that the post office would be relocated at that time to the town center mall. I ask him to withdraw it, Mr. Speaker. Make your case. Make your case. Don't create distractions. Make your case.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Garden Hills.
What I spoke to, Mr. Speaker, was this: that the committee that was established by the cabinet, there's absolutely no dispute about this, Mr. Speaker. The committee that was established by the cabinet recommended that the town center mall be rented to house the post office. That's a statement of fact.
On a point of order, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Cat Island, Ram Kingston, Salvador.
The committee on which I served, along with a member of Engliston, never recommended the rental of the town center mall to the government. We were appointed to explore and to find out the best location or suitable location to temporarily house the post office. Consideration was being given to the town center mall, but it never evolved to a recommendation to the renting of the town center mall. In fact, it was rejected, right? And in fact, Mr. Speaker, and that the cabinet itself recognized that.
Honourable member for Garden.
There was no decision that was taken to rent.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member, are you stating that as a fact or as your opinion?
Mr. Speaker, I could say to you, I'm going to take a risk, Mr. Speaker. I don't know the protocol. What I will do, Mr. Speaker, is note the recommendations of this committee, recommendations that were signed by D. Shane Gibson, and I'll note the recommendations by Mr. Gibson to the Prime Minister. And I'm going to read through them, Mr. Speaker. That the Cabinet was to note the hazardous working condition of the General Post Office and the staff at East Hill Street. That the Cabinet would to note that the Cabinet Mr. Speaker,
honourable members, honourable members,
I have to do this.
Honourable members, on a point of order.
I am not objecting to the member reading what he's reading, because it's the evidence as they say. But he need not to mislead this Parliament by indicating that he's reading from a letter signed by D. You said letter. See that? Oh, Jesus Christ. Oh, hear it. Oh, hear it. Go back to this. Oh, hear it. Oh, hear it.
Honourable members.
Cabinet paper is reading from. You want to follow him? You want to follow him reading?
They know what the cabinet paper.
So you get the cabinet paper.
I did not say letter. I didn't intend to say letter. I said that the committee headed by D. Shane Gibson, who had responsibility at the time for the Ministry of Public Service, which has responsibilities for accommodations. And so, what Mr. Gibson said in his advice, I believe, I'm sure he was speaking for the committee, because this was from the committee. That's okay. Let me just read the three things he said. Note the hazardous working condition of the post office. Note the need to relocate the post office. Note that the town center mall Note that the Town Center Mall has been identified as a suitable location for the post office. That's your committee. That's the advice given to the Prime Minister. Okay, Mr. Gibson was speaking as a member, the cabinet minister with responsibility for accommodations there.
He's a member of the
Fine, if you want to diss Mr. Gibson because saying, yeah, that's your problem.
He's a member of the committee.
What I do know is that a committee was set out to deal with identifying a suitable location. It was a cabinet committee, and the minister with responsibility for accommodations was reporting to cabinet. And so that is the circumstances upon where we are today. Mr. Speaker, having identified the Town Center Mall as the best location for the post office, I said in the background of those negotiations, going on at the same time, was negotiations by the owners of the mall to sell it to a fellow named Finlayson. That deal didn't work, Mr. Speaker. Didn't work. So they moved on down the road, a couple 100 feet down the road.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Angleston on a point of order.
The Bible says, as a man thinketh, so is he. And obviously, they must be fixing up their boy in this transaction that before this
honourable member. Honourable member.
He said it again, Mr. Fixing up your boy.
Member. On a point of order.
When I speak, Speaker. When I speak,
He said fixing up our boy.
Speaker, speak.
Remember Gardner said it.
Honourable member, you must be on a point of order.
Yes, Speaker. Speaker, the point of
I can tell you what I mean by that too.
How about fixing up your boy?
I can show you what I mean by that too.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Would the honourable member please withdraw her reference to me as my boy? She was clearly talking about me.
Yeah.
So please ask her to use her parliamentary dignity and withdraw that comment.
Honourable member for Angleston.
Speaker, can you imagine the member on that side, this is a senior member of the Parliament, the member on that side referred to a private citizen as a boy. As a boy! But now, when I say we can use the same language for this member, it's not acceptable. The Speaker, it's not acceptable for me, and I withdraw it. I expect this member to withdraw it, Speaker. I expect this member to withdraw the Speaker, and I object to his assertion to me unless he can show that the reason, as a member of that committee, recommended anything because of some person who was seeking to buy Town Center Mall, I am asking him to withdraw it. He must establish it. I did withdraw it.
Mr. Speaker, I move on to the City Market building on the Tony Williams Darling Highway. So as we move from Town Center Mall, Mr. Speaker, we move to City Market. And the City Market purchase is an interesting one. City Market building is located in the great constituency Garden Hills. It's located in Blue Hill Estates. And the residents of Blue Hill Estates objected strongly to the government putting the post office in their facility. Not because the government was putting a post office there, though. They objected because the government was going to build 3 stories. There were no parking facilities. They feared that there would be many problematic issues in the area. What was most regrettable for the people in Blue Hill Estate, Mr. Speaker, is the government never said a word to them. The government never told one resident of the constituency that they were building this post office. This was a deal on the low. And I can tell you why it's a deal. I can tell you why it's a deal. Mr. Speaker, it had to be a deal, you know, because the member of Parliament for Cat Island, Rumpkins, and Salvador was invited to a town meeting in Blue Hill Estates, our wonderful church, Chapel on the Hill, invited to town meeting to explain his position. He was accompanied by the Member of Parliament for Garden Hills. Had a wonderful town meeting in that place, Mr. Speaker. And he told the residents of Blue Hill Estates that he didn't know about it. Mr. Minister of Public Works.
No, man.
He told them.
Honorable member.
I was in the meeting.
Honorable member.
He told them.
Honorable member for Garden Hills, the member for Cat Island is on the street. Are you on a point of order, honorable member?
I never told the residents at any meeting I would have had with them where they were expressing their concerns, right, which related not to the post office as much as it was their access in and out of. Access in and out of, because the owner of the property closed his access that they had to the east. And I never told him I knew nothing about it. I never told him that.
Mr. Speaker, I stand by the word. I stand by the word. I'll tell you what he did not say, Mr. Speaker. Because in that meeting, I had somebody ask him this question. How much the government invested in the project? I specifically had a member from Blue Hill ask that question. His words to the group was, the fellow was building something and the government was going to potentially look at it for rent. His words to the community of Blue Hill Estates. More than that, Mr. Speaker, the suggestion was that he was not aware that the government had invested nearly $3 million in the project. That's his words. And all of you in the media have an opportunity to actually go back and look at the recording. And if you don't have the recording, you can go in Blue Hill Estates and poll the residents. I don't have nothing to hide. I don't have nothing to lie about. And so, Mr. Speaker, having said that, the Member of Parliament for Garden Hills at the time, Mr. Kendall Major, who was former Speaker of this House, urged the minister to shut down the project because they didn't have a permit to build. They didn't have a permit to build. Now bear in mind that the government had already given them nearly $3 million. In the background, the government gave them that. But they didn't have any permit to build. I can tell you now. The Minister of Works left that meeting with a commitment. A commitment to stopping the works on that building. And I was puzzled as to why the government would stop its own work. Why would the government, having spent $2 million on a project, having gone out and said to these individuals, I want you to buy the town center mall for no more than $4 million? Having to buy the city market building for no more than $4 million. Having done that, Mr. Speaker, having done that, I was totally perplexed, Mr. Speaker, as to why the government would stop its own work. Why would the government stop its own work? Why would I pay you for $3 million to do work for me, notwithstanding you don't have the right permits? I then stop the work. What is interesting in this, Mr. Speaker, is this. I see the government now trying to pivot and accuse the F&M of stopping the work. The former government. I see the Member of Parliament for Cat Island saying what the F&M did. I listened to the words and the comments by the former MP for Fox Hill, talking about how dreadful the situation is. The government never intended to do anything else. The government only intended to do the work at the Independent Shopping Center. Well, you know, when he was in office, they used to call him Flying Fred. I say to my constituents, now that he's out of office, if he was in Trump world, he would get the nickname that's opposite the flying. And so I continue, Mr. Speaker. I continue, Mr. Speaker, to speak to, Mr. Speaker, what the former government said they would do, what they sought out to do. What I didn't say to you, Mr. Speaker, is the former government committee agreed that they would not only go 2 floors, they agreed that they would pay $25 a square foot. What we propose to you today is almost half of that, $12 a square foot. Unprecedented in the public service. I have a list of rents and leases we pay in the public service now. It ranges from $90 a square foot, $90 a square foot, Mr. Speaker, to $12. That is what happens in the public service today. It doesn't matter whether you are white or black. It doesn't matter what the situation is. The government needs the space. The space is negotiated at a reasonable rate. And we go forward. And let me tell you why Bamboo Town, why they said the cost was $8 million and $9 million. What they said was that at $25 a square foot, and the extent of the rent would run to $4 million. And then they said, and this is what the committee agreed to now, they agreed that the mall owners would do the upgrade and maintenance work and bring it to 8. So that's how come they come up with the $8 million. Yes. And so the move from Town Center Mall to City Market was very simple for the PLP. They said, listen, let's spend the $8 million, which is reasonable, on the City Market building, where we're going to pay $4 million for the property and $4 million for renovation. And at the end of that exercise, we will own the property. We will not own Town Center Mall. That was the reason they moved. Of course, the second reason they moved, and that's why I said one of the boys, is I was curious as to what I'm explaining to you why I said, Mr. Speaker, I'm explaining to you and the Bahamian public why perhaps this other move was made, having regard for the fact that the first move involved the sale of the mall and the repairs and all these other things to a man named Finlayson, and that didn't work out. They moved the Town Center Mall, and the project manager that they chose was another Simonet. His first name was Chris. And I work in the Ministry of National Insurance, that I have lots of building under construction and such. And I see this name over and over and over in every project, no matter what it is. Chris Simonet here, Chris Simonet there, Chris Simonet everywhere. I guess he is the only person fit to do the job. And he's one of the boys. He's one of the boys. Mr. Speaker, and that's why I said, we got to fix up the boys. Yes, that's what you did. And so, Mr. Speaker, having gone to City Market without taking into account the residents in Blue Hill Estates, and having taken the step by the Minister of Public Works to shut down the City Market complex, I suspect, though, it was shut down primarily because elections in there and Blue Hill Estates have a lot of votes. And so, and to give the Minister of Works real credit, he shut it down because the individuals did not have any permit. They required permits to do the work. And so I was amazed that the owner of City Market, the owner of that complex, came on radio that and made the comment that he didn't hear from us. And he never took the time to speak to the man who shut down his project. I'm just amazed by those kinds of action. And Mr. Speaker, having shut down the work at City Market on Tony Williams Highway, PLB always have a plan. They went back to the post office on East Street. And they were in the process of offering a $4.5 million contract to somebody else to do some repairs on the condemned building at the post office. Fellow already mobilized, started the work. Michael Fountain, that's his name. You all know him. Minister of Works know him. He's having shut down City Market in Tony Williams Highway. Then offered a contract, Mr. Fountain, to do repair work on a building that he condemned. Wow. I wouldn't characterize that as pure wasting of the Bahamian money. That's neglect. That's nearly $5 million that they were about to expend on the post office, even though it was condemned. Even though it was condemned. Oh, Lord. And so, Mr. Speaker, having regard for the great people of the Bahamas, we were very interested in moving to the Penn's building on Gladstone Road. The Minister of Works underscored the process that was taking place. And he underscored the reason why we couldn't do that. And hence we are back to a position, back to the place that the committee members headed by Mr. Gibson and Mr. Davis and Glenasana Martin, committee headed by them said is the best place, ideal place for post office. And now they criticize it. So I asked today, I wish to see which member of Cat Island is going to speak. The one who said to the Prime Minister this is the best place to be? Or the one who says today this is a bad choice? I want to see which member of Cat Island is going to stand up in this place today. The one who says, I'm going to rent the town center mall at $25 a square foot, or I'm going to object to the rental of the town center mall for $12 a square foot. And the Bahamian public will make a judgment, not me. They will make a judgment as to who to believe and who to trust and who's taking a position in the best interest of the people. And so, Mr. Speaker, I told my good colleague from South Andrews, I know they can put pressure on him to speak today. I warned him. I said they can put pressure on him. But I could say this. The Ministry of Public Service does not discriminate on who it rents from. It could be a PLC, it could be FNL, it could be anything. If you have the space that we need and the department could fit in that space, we will rent it. And so we rent from those members' offices. We rent from them with no objection, no disclosure. There's no need to disclose. None. Two senior members over there we rent from now. We don't have to disclose. Wow. We're in the process, Mr. Speaker. We're in the process of closing a deal. We're in the process of closing a deal.
Wow.
Huh?
Are they exempted?
We anticipate. Let me just say this, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, we are trying to place civil aviation in a good space at Airport Park, in a good space. Good space. We're not going to ask them to disclose, because that is the space that has been identified. We ain't going to do that, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, they have raised a higher standard. They have raised a higher standard, Mr. Speaker. But the Minister of Public Service and the Ministry of Public Service don't get involved in the politics of these issues. We rent from the best people who have the best space at the best cost to the public service. And in this case, Town Center Mall is no exception. A rent of $24 a square foot is an exceptional rate. $12 a square foot is an exceptional rate. An exceptional rate. And so, Mr. Speaker, I'm not here to cast anything. But I thought this cartoon was interesting. Because it depicts, Mr. Speaker, that when I'm in government, when I'm sitting on this side, when I'm the government and sitting on this side, is a good place to rent and lease the Town Center Mall. But when I'm on the other side, Mr. Speaker, the same Town Center Mall that we said was good and the best place to lease, we've now changed our mind. And so, Mr. Speaker, I've been listening very carefully to the contribution of the two members. There's two members. The other two members, you know, they're involved. But the two members who was on that special select committee that told the government that this is the best place to rent, I want to see how they're going to pivot today, how they can turn around and change what they say. No wonder, Mr. Speaker, if they change their words today, no wonder thousands of ordinary Bahamians will look at us as politicians and say, you all ain't worth nothing. You say one thing when you're in government, you change when you're in opposition. And so, Mr. Speaker, I support this resolution, and I look forward to us working in the best interests of the Bahamian people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following resolution be agreed and passed. Whereas the General Post Office building on East Hill Street in the city of Nassau has been condemned as being structurally unsound while suffering also from periodic deep-rooted mold infestation, particularly black mold and other harmful environmental pathogens, now be it hereby resolved that this House does approve the government entering into a 5-year leasehold agreement with the landlord of the Town Center Mall for the relocation of all functions of the General Post Office, pending the construction of a new General Post Office by the government by way of a public-private partnership. As many, the Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Mangrove Key, South and Central Andros.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, we are at the 1 o'clock hour, and as customary in the House, I do move that the House suspends until 3 p.m. for our lunch break.
Second, Mr. Speaker.
It has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do suspend until 3 p.m. this afternoon. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.